Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Visually Hidden Podcast. I'm Peter O'Brien, and again with me today is Mr. Stephen Bendler.
Howdy.
And Mademoiselle Anne Milleville.
Bonjour, hello.
Last week, we talked quite a bit about the Jaws series, and on the day that we posted the podcast, we got the sad news that Roger Kastel, the artist who painted the original Jaws poster, had passed away. It was just kind of a sad coincidence. I was all excited to share our discussion, and then that news came around the corner. I was like, oh, man.
Yeah, that was a bummer.
Yeah, I didn't even really know how to react because I used the artwork in our promotional card for the episode. It's just such an iconic image, and then to see that he had passed that day, it really just kind of took a lot of the wind out of my sails.
Without knowing it, we kind of made a tribute to his work because we talked about the movie, of course, but we talked about the success of it, and the poster was a part of it. So, yeah, we kind of made a tribute to him.
We were just talking about Jaws. We were talking about all the different aspects of it, talking about the books tied to it, talking about the music tied to it. And then you have someone who I think was an integral part of that whole campaign, the marketing campaign, pass away. So it's pretty sad, and it's one of those weird coincidences.
A very, very sad coincidence. Very quickly, though, I was reading up a little bit about him, and I found out that he's actually from White Plains, New York, which is somewhere we all know pretty well.
Crazy.
It's so funny how many people really do come from this area, you know? It's just strange, another funny coincidence.
Yeah. Yeah, and Anne, of course, knows it because she studied in Tarrytown for a little bit.
Yeah, and I made an internship in White Plains. So, yes, I know pretty well what White Plains.
When we left our conversation, Steve, you were headed to a horror convention. Is that correct?
That is correct. The convention is Monster Mania, which I've been to a bunch of times, and I personally love. But I went with the specific goal of meeting Roger Jackson, who is the voice of Ghostface from the Scream series, among many other things. Tom Atkins was a late addition to the roster, but I was super psyched to go meet him, so he was top of the list. And then if I had the time, because you never know how long these lines are going to be to meet everyone, I wanted to meet C.J. Graham, who played my favorite version of Jason in Jason Lives, Friday the 13th, Part 6. And I was successful. I got to meet all three of them. So, yeah, I got a nice Ghostface mask signed by Roger Jackson, a Jason mask signed by C.J. Graham, and I got a really cool 8x10 signed by Tom Atkins. So it was a really nice experience. The Tom Atkins stuff has been posted. C.J. Graham I'll probably post later on today. I try to space them out when I do a bunch of people in one con. I try to give them their due and post them as I go. So, yeah, so throughout the week, I'll continue to post more pictures of that stuff.
I'm a huge fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And this year, actually, I went to a convention in Paris, and I met Carpenter, but I don't know if you know. She plays Cordelia in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. And yeah, it was great because everybody was speaking French and they needed a translator. So at least I was the only one able to speak English to her. So she was really nice with me. I think it's easier for her to have someone talking to her directly than having a translator. So yeah, I spent a very nice moment there. And maybe I'm going to do another one.
It's a very interesting atmosphere over at the conventions. I know I used to go to the Chiller Theater convention in northern New Jersey when I was in high school. It really is a lot of fun because it's kind of like a pop culture flea market. If you're a collector of anything related to popular culture, whether it's posters or prints or comics or toys or models or t-shirts, magazines, like they have anything you could think of.
I love the artwork when you go to these things because you find some artists who do some beautiful work. And Pete, I had sent you that painting that guy made of Dr. Phibes. I was like, oh, look at that. Dr. Phibes.
Yeah.
So I was like, let me send that to Pete real quick. But yeah, I love when you see what the artists bring to the table.
Yeah, I remember I went to the last one I went to, I found an artist and I got some prints from him, and I actually got you a Ghostface print while I was there.
Indeed.
But who's like one of the funnest people you've ever encountered, or one of the most interesting people, celebrity-wise, that you've ever encountered at a convention?
Well, one of the most fun interactions I've ever had with anyone was Bernie from Weekend at Bernie's.
Oh,
He was such a cool dude, like just a lot of fun. And he, like, that laugh he has is his real laugh. So it's engaging with us. And he was really cool to my son. He had a lot of fun with my mother. I thought I was going to walk away with a stepdad. after that one. Him and my mom got on like a house on fire. So, but he was like one of the coolest experiences that I ever had at a con.
The last one I went to, I didn't really go to get anything signed. I didn't go to get meet anybody. Like, they were there and I saw them, like, oh yeah, there's William Zabka, there's Burt Young, there's Karen Allen. I saw all these people, but I didn't have, I guess, desire to like go and talk to them. And I don't know why. I was wondering, Steve, like, because you go to these pretty regularly, you get things signed, you meet these people, you talk to them. I wanted to know, like, what's your motivation? What's your experience? Like, why?
Well, I'm a collector. I'm a big collector of toys and all things pop culture. So for me, it's about movies that mean something to me or have been a part of my life for a very long time. I don't just go to meet anybody. I have a very specific list of people I want to meet. It's about who means something to me or means the most to me. And then I want them to sign not just a picture or a toy, but the most badass thing that they could possibly sign. And then have that in my collection as a holy grail. So I have the Kruger glove signed by Robert Englund. You can't do better than that. Now I've got the Ghostface mask signed by the voice of Ghostface. You can't do better than that. So I've got a Michael mask signed by Nick Castle. I think the one I'm going to be hunting down, I don't know how readily available she is, but Kathy Bates, I want her to sign a Sledgehammer. So I need that. I need that for my misery collection. But that's the other thing I would get is Stephen King to sign a typewriter, because you can't do better than that, right?
So it's the collector part of your personality
Yeah.
that drives you.
People who I really enjoy their work or who are part of something that really means something to me, that's who I go for.
You know what's really funny, though? One of the people that I've always wanted to meet, I actually met here on the street.
Really?
Yeah, me too. French actors and singers, but that's funny because sometimes you meet them like that, it's a coincidence, and that's the one you wanted to meet, so that's funny.
A couple of years ago, I got to meet Michael Biehn coming out of his childhood home.
Nice.
And it's really funny because he was in town for a screening of The Terminator, which I had gone to the night before. So I got to like meet him and be a part of his Q&A. But then the next day he was visiting his childhood home and I was walking my dog and out he came. And so like I just got to hang out and talk with him for like half an hour on the street. And we were like best friends for half an hour. It was one of the best days.
It's interesting when stuff like that happens.
And you have better conversation. The conversation is always more interesting when you meet someone like that than in a convention. They're just having so many people to meet. Instead of this moment is really special for them and for you. So,
in addition to your adventure at the Comic-Con this weekend, you went and saw the Jaws stage play. What's the name? Where'd you see it? Who's in it? What's the story? And then how was it? Really quick.
Sure. It's The Shark is Broken. It was at the Golden Theater in Manhattan. It closes today, and it is written by Ian Shaw, who is Robert Shaw's son, who plays Quint in the movie. He plays his father in the play. He also co-directed the show. Alex Brightman, who had played Beetlejuice on Broadway previously, who was brilliant as Beetlejuice, plays Richard Dreyfuss, and he's hilarious in the show. And Colin Donnell plays Roy Scheider. So there's some parts of the show were absolutely beautiful. The production was gorgeous. I mean, you walk into the theater and you just see the boat, the orca, sitting in the middle of the stage. And behind it is like an LED screen, I guess it is. But it was really awesome because it just shows water. And then on the stage itself, you see that same projection of water. So it's constantly moving the entire time. So there's parts of the show where the water starts to get choppy and the color of the sky will change. It was a really cool effect. And then as the water gets choppier, it starts to move on the screen, and then the actors will move with the boat, and it looks like they're getting pushed to the side. Really, really cool effect. So you felt like, even though you knew the boat wasn't moving, at times you felt like the boat was moving. And just seeing those guys in there with those costumes, it really like made the whole thing pop.
Yeah, I had heard about it a couple of years ago. They've been talking about this particular production, and I remember seeing a video with Ian Shaw talking about it, and he was dressed in his father's like actual costume from the film. And yeah, it looked really, really spectacular. If it does come my way, I definitely want to try to check it out. Usually they do record a performance for posterity, to just keep for the ages. And so maybe if it doesn't travel, hopefully they release it in some way at some point. I know sometimes they'll put, like, Fathom Events will run a stage play in theaters for people who don't have access to these locations or these actors or performances. So maybe that's down the road as
Yeah,
well.
Phantom Events does do that. They've been doing more of that as of late. The other thing that I found out was that if you go to the Lincoln Center Library, you could watch any show you want, but you could watch it only there, like it's on their database. And then I heard that as of late, they've been adding more quality material to the Broadway HD streaming service. So I don't know if that'll pop up on there maybe at some point.
You talked about the boat and the water in the Jaw
Mhm.
show. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about Misery, and you had mentioned the
Yeah.
stage and how it rotated and turned and the light changed and everything. So I guess my real question here is regarding production value, and how do you achieve good production value in a stage, because it's not even half a room. It's like a quarter or an eighth of a room. It's a floor and a back wall. So how do you create all these atmospheres to achieve the goals of your production? And that's I guess what we call production value, and it applies to theater, it applies to film and cinema, and it can even apply to podcast and web series, things like that. So I wanted to talk a little bit about that aspect.
Yeah, my rule of thumb for anything is keep it simple. I think the minute you try to overcomplicate things, you're inviting problems in. But for instance, in the show that my friend and I were putting up, our Christmas play, we wanted certain things to be inside our show or to happen inside of our show. And when we couldn't meet that request, whether it be financially or just logistically, we'd leave it out or we'd rewrite around it. Like, for instance, we wanted conveyor belts in Santa's workshop. We tried to make them the best we could, but then at the end of the day, it's not a real conveyor belt. This time around, we actually have real conveyor belts. You use what you have, like the DIY mentality of independent filmmaking, get creative, do what you can. But also, there comes a point in time where, okay, I wanted it to snow in one scene of the Christmas show. And I tried to get up on a ladder and sprinkle some fake snow, and it didn't look good. So we cut it. There will be no snow in the scene. We'll sprinkle some on the
Mm-hmm.
floor. It looked like it had snowed, but the snowing while the scene takes place, it didn't look effective. It didn't look good. And it's just going to cheapen the show. And then people are going to be distracted by the fake snow and not watch the actual emotional scene that's taking place. For the Jaws show, it's hard to explain, but they built the orca, but then it looks like the orca was sliced, like a piece was sliced off so you could see inside of the orca. But on the very
Mm-hmm.
bottom of the boat, they left a little plank of wood. So the water effect that they were projecting onto the stage was also hitting the base of the boat. So it really like the boat was in the water. The effectiveness of what I saw last night was fantastic. In this projected LED screen, you saw like another boat in the background, like a sailboat going by. They had like seagulls flying in the sky, and then they have like very light. You could hear the ocean sound, but lightly in the background, so it gives you that feel. And also, when the show opens, it's just the boat by itself, and you see the fin of Bruce going through the water. As it gets close to the boat, they're like, "Cut, we have a problem," and then like that's how the show starts. And they come out complaining like, "Oh, Jesus fucking Christ, that shark again!" And then they start, they're all ranting and raving about how they're stuck in this boat waiting for this stupid shark, and on that. It's a really great way to start the show, but it was a very minimum approach. The show is about the men and their relationship, but they really built the surroundings, so you could do a lot with very little, and I'm a firm believer of that.
Well, I feel like in the theater, you can get away with that a little bit more. People, they have it in their mind that, okay, we're going to see a performance. So you can get away with bare minimum because people's perceptions of what they're going to experience are different when they go to the play versus when they go to the movies. If you went to a movie and you just saw people standing in like a black void talking intensely and dramatically to one another, it wouldn't necessarily fly unless that was a part of the idea behind the movie, and then you broke out of it and you were in actual sets or
Right.
settings. I know that when I've approached many of the films that I've made, it's usually, okay, what do I have access to? I start, like, before I even start, like, I have my story, I have my idea, I have my characters, but then as I develop the script and where am I going to take these characters on this journey, I start to make like kind of a mental or physical list of, like, what do I have access to? What is available to me that I don't have to worry about, that I don't have to overextend my resources, whether they're financial or time wise. What do I have access to? And then what also are my goals for the story and for these characters, like, and challenges for myself. I know with Misery Loves Company, I tried to keep it minimal where we only had like maybe like 4 or 5 sets. We had the movie theater, we had the bar, we had the apartment, and then we had, outdoor stuff and the coffee shop. It was like five locations that we really kind of played with, and the car.
Mhm.
But I know that with Running Through Darkness, I wanted to extend my settings and extend my world, open it up a little bit. So with that, I kind of didn't rely so much on what I had access to as much as what I wanted to do. And then part of the challenge was trying to find these locations. I know in Running Through Darkness specifically, I wrote in a scene in a coffee shop and we went into the coffee shop to film it. We had permission, but it was similar to the experience on Misery Loves Company where the sound was just going to be awful.
Yeah.
I walked in there and I got super sad. Then I took my sound guy and we just walked around the street where we were filming, and we found this little alley, even though it was under a freeway overpass, I asked him, I was like, where's the sound going to be better, here or there? And he said here. So we grabbed everybody out of the coffee shop, we went into the alley, and we shot the scene. Because again, even though you're outside and you have all of these different sounds of life and city and people, you're not in a box where the sound is bouncing off of the ceiling and off of the walls and off of all the surfaces in the room. So in that regard, it's like, okay, yeah, you can't control the outside audio, but you can control it a little bit better with your microphone positioning than you can in a confined space. And so that's kind of something that you just learn from going through the motions.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanted to react on what you said about thinking about your budget when you write. I mean, thinking what will be possible when you write, because as you may know, Pete, that's my main issue. When I write something, I don't think about how it's going to be in reality. And sometimes my story is like a $5 million budget, while I don't have that. So sometimes I have to rethink the raw thing. But yeah, that's how you learn, right? And it make me remember of a film, a short film we made together. I don't know if you remember, Pete. When I was in New York, we made a short film, and the first scene was supposed to be in the train. The train from Grand Central to Terrytown. And I wanted, in my script, I wanted to have a scene in the train. But actually it wasn't possible. We didn't have any money, so we couldn't stop the train. So it was just the time of the stop at Terrytown. The actor was supposed to go in the train to play like someone's asleep. And we start filming, and actually it was too short because the train was about to move. So yeah, we couldn't do it, and we had to rethink the scene, which was quite easy to rethink because we just thought that he could go out of the train and start there. But sometimes you think this kind of thing of scene is really simple to do. It's just a guy sleeping in a train, but actually in reality it won't be possible to do it. So yeah, you have to think about that when you start writing, otherwise you're really disappointed, really upset when it comes to reality.
If it was just you and the actor and the camera, you could probably get away with stealing that shot. But for the sake of having a crew with you, which is another element that comes into play, how big is your crew and how are you going to transport them and provide for them? Everybody, whenever they're watching a film, they always forget about the other side of the camera. You see like the one actor on the screen doing whatever their character has to do, but there's at least 5 to maybe 50 people on the other side of that camera doing a number of different things, and that all adds into the production value as well. That's kind of how it goes with financed films and big productions. Even small productions, independent films have that as well. But if you take a guerrilla approach to filmmaking, you can really get away with some impressive stuff. And that's usually how it goes when people want to add production value to their films. They will go film in Times Square, but only for like 90 seconds. Okay, everybody get out of the car, go.
Yeah.
And it's like a bank heist.
But then there's also, to what Anne said, there's the reality of like, well, this is what I wrote and this is what I wanted. However, when I'm in the situation and I'm on set or on location or wherever, and what I wrote is not working, then I'm gonna have to make an alteration. But so there's a lot of factors. There's time, there's money, there's permission. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into all that. But I think for me, it's always never settle, but then also ask yourself, is it necessary? Like, do I need the helicopter crash to tell my story? So I think there's a fine balance there between not settling and like having way too big an expectation.
Yeah, and at least if your first shot movie is a success, then maybe you can remake the movie with the original scenario.
Yeah, well, I've always found that there's enough creativity to go around. So yeah, it's like if you want the helicopter crash but you can't afford it, okay, well, what do you want more? Do you want the helicopter crash or do you want the film?
Right.
You have all these other things lined up. You don't have this one thing. Do you want to shoot the film or do you want to shoot that particular scene or stunt or whatever? I know that when we were filming Running Through Darkness, I wanted to have a chase scene. And at the probably end of the second act, there is this elaborate chase scene because the main actor, he runs, and I wanted to utilize that element of his character to a greater effect. And my inspiration for it was, of course, Point Break, which is one of the greatest foot chase scenes ever. But in that movie, they have like an exploding gas station and they're jumping through windows, and we didn't have that. We couldn't blow up a gas station. Then it becomes a question of like, all right, what do we have access to? How can we maximize this? What is available? And the night before we filmed it, we just kind of ran down a list of what we had access to, and we just made a list, and it's like, okay, we can go from here to here, and then we can go from here to here to here, and then we could do this, and then okay, and then we can have the one actor do this. Okay. It just kind of came together. We took that guerrilla filmmaking approach where we're not going to be anywhere long enough to get in trouble. And anywhere that we can get in trouble, we have access to. So we like ran through a couple of houses in the film, but they were houses of people that we knew. And as a thank you, we let them be in the film or we gave them credit. So it just comes down to what is available to you and what works within your story.
I agree. I always say the story is the boss. I might want all these grandiose things, but at the end of the day, if the story is not served, if the plot is not furthered, then what's the point?
One of my favorite independent films that I felt has tremendous production value is Escape from New York. And I talked about it a little bit this week on the VHS program. It was our selection this week. I wanted to talk a little bit about that film today because it is an independent film. In the video, I referred to it as a masterclass in independent filmmaking. It has a very minimal budget. It was shot in 1981, and they just took a lot of unique approaches to maximize the quality of this film. And I still believe that it holds up when compared to a lot of other films, especially the sequel, in terms of production value. And again, it was shot in 1981, minimal budget. I think it was like, I've seen anywhere from like $3.5 million to $6 million as the reported budget. So I just say it's around $5 million. And in this film, you have a ridiculous cast. You have a star. It's a science fiction action film, which to the audience means, okay, I need to see some action. I need to see either explosions or gunfighting or something, a car chase or whatever. And this film has all of it. I have to see some science fiction elements, so some type of new technology, and it has that as well, but it achieves it on such a small budget, but it's a maximized scale. And so I just think it's a very unique presentation of that idea, and it's a great example of maximizing production value.
Indeed. I mean, never realized that it was an independent film, but I watched it again. This is my third time seeing the movie. Now, it's not one of my favorite Carpenter movies. Every time I see it, I appreciate it more and more. But I will say that the model that they use for the city is striking. I think it's really awesome. I mean, the shots, it's shot beautifully. And I really do, like I said, I really appreciate this movie more every time I watch it.
And you had never seen Escape from New York before, right?
Yeah, I had never heard of Kurt Russell before, neither John Carpenter. So really, it was pretty new for me. It's not really popular here in Europe. I mean, in France, at least. And the first time I watched it, I was like, "Oh, okay, it's so bad, then it's good," you know. But then I rewatched it for today, and I agree with Steve. You can't think it's an indie movie. really, because the special effects are pretty good, except maybe you can have a loss on a few things, like for example the capsule of the president, the one who helped him to escape the Air Force One. It's kind of a joke, but I mean, except that the music is fantastic, the cast is fantastic, even the light. I was talking about the Panic Room in the third or fourth episode of our podcast. I don't remember. Still available on our YouTube channel.
Mhm.
And I remember then I said on about Panic Room that it's sometimes you watch movies with dark scenes and it's not clear to watch. It's not easy to watch. And this movie, as a Panic Room, it's
Oh
the
yeah.
light is great. I mean, you quite all the movies during night. I think all the movies during the night, actually. And it's clear. You can see many lights, and I don't know. It's a nice cinematography. So you can't expect that from an indie movie. And yeah, it was a pleasure to rewatch it, actually. So yeah, it's a great movie.
Right. So I just want to clarify something. This was an independent film, but this was an independent film from 1981, which is a completely different time period than today as far as independent film goes. Independent film today, it barely means what it used to mean. And so at its core, an independent film is any film that is produced outside of the Hollywood studio system. So Paramount, Warner Brothers, or Disney, or whatever. Anything that was not produced by a studio was considered an independent film. And so the production company behind this was Avco Embassy. But anything produced outside of the studio system was considered an independent film. And even the regulations were a little bit lighter. You didn't necessarily have to use union employees, so they weren't susceptible to the regulations of the Hollywood unions. So, in that regard, Escape from New York is an independent film.
I think for me, the one thing that still doesn't work and that I don't like about it is Isaac Hayes and his whole group of people. They're too cartoony for me. To me, that the crazies work fine. Like when they're chasing him through the windows and whatever, that's cool. That works for me. I'm on board 100%. But then once Isaac Hayes is introduced, and I like Isaac Hayes, and I was sitting there like, why doesn't it work for me? And what was bugging me, and the whole scene where Kurt Russell's in the ring with that big guy, I think I
Mhm.
would have rather see more time between Isaac Hayes' character and Snake in lieu of that fight. I would have rather see more tension between the hero and the villain in that space of time, so that when the chase ensues later on, I feel like the stakes are a little bit higher. And for me, the Romero character I like the least, because I get the skank gutter boy vibe. That there's something weird about the '80s with those over the top ridiculous villains that just for me is like, what are you doing? I don't mind if Kurt Russell fights that dude, but maybe just like one more scene between Isaac Hayes and Kurt Russell, some to build some real tension. That for me is all that's missing.
Yeah, I didn't feel that way, but I liked actually the villains in this movie and all the creepy guys. You feel that they have been avoiding the sun for too long. They have a lack of vitamin D or something like that. But I like it. I think it's part of the creepiness of the this movie. So yeah, I liked it. Really, I like this movie from the start to the end.
I don't necessarily disagree, but I kind of just accept it because, again, as I said in the video, it's kind of an alternative and creative story approach. I like when my expectations aren't met. Not necessarily that they're exceeded, but when they're just, okay, I think it's going to be this and they're got to have this scene. And when I don't get that, it's like, oh, I didn't get that. That's kind of interesting. Why didn't I get that? It actually makes me happy because then the director is thinking about it in a different way than convention would dictate. But yeah, I do feel like there could have been a little bit more tension between Snake and the Duke. They do have some moments, of course, and I feel like it's like, again, it's like minimal. It's it's enough to convey it. They have their face-to-face confrontation, and he twists the arrow in his leg. Then he kind of just throws him to the wolves in the arena, and that sort of is derailed by other plot points with Brain and Maggie trying to steal Snake's thunder and make off with the president. So it's almost like, okay, yeah, like the story is going this direction, but then we got a twist. And again, there's another twist thrown in with with the
Yeah.
president. And that scene is just fantastic. You think like, oh, well, Snake is the hero. He's going to defeat the bad guy. And then here comes Donald Pleasence with a machine gun.
I shot him 6
just,
times. Yeah.
you are the Duke of New York. You're number one. Like, Snake didn't save the day, but he did.
Mhm.
So those twists and turns within the story that kind of make it fun and interesting for me. And that's one of the things that I really appreciate about it, is that it doesn't subscribe to convention, but it still achieves its goal and it still accomplishes what it sets out to do. If you look at it a different way, and the president is the main character and this is his escape from New York,
Yeah.
then he's totally antagonized. He loses his finger. He's used for target practice. They dress him up in a wig and like degrade and humiliate him. They do all these things, and then at the end, the president is the one who saves the anti-hero. It's again, it's just kind of how you choose to look at it. You can tell that I've seen this
A few
movie
times.
more than a few times.
Well, I'll tell you, I was in the city last night seeing this show, and by some of the things I've seen in the city, I feel like they put the walls up around Manhattan, and I had to get out. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, it's funny. The film, it takes place in New York as viewed from the early 80s and late 70s, and that was no fairy tale time in Manhattan history. It was actually not far off the
Nope.
mark. I mean, if you go and you look at some video footage of Times Square in the 1980s, it was and in the late 70s, it wasn't the Disneyland annex that it has become today. It adds to the datedness, but it also adds to the authenticity. And so if you're not familiar with history, then it could come off as like, oh, well, no, that New York is nothing like that. And it's like, well,
Yeah.
maybe you should go watch Death Wish.
Yeah, no, this is a good one. I might have to add it to my physical collection. I don't own it, but maybe I should.
And I
Yes.
was wondering why Snake Plissken has a patch on his eye. We don't know that.
The assumption is that he lost it during the course of his life as a soldier and or as a gunfighter, as a criminal. Just getting into some tough situation caused him to lose his eye. But again, if you read the novelization, I believe it is also tied to the nerve gas. He suffered some injury. I don't think his eye is actually missing underneath the patch. I think it's just dead. And so he has to wear the patch in order to not scare people when he looks at them even more.
Yeah, but it's not explained in the movie, right? It's something that you read in the book, and
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not explained in the movie. They address it a little bit in the book, but the assumption for the viewer is that, okay, he's just a tough customer and he got into a situation where he lost his eye, and he's still losing an eye is not going to stop him or slow him down or prevent him from doing what he has to do.
Yeah, but when you watch the movie, you want to know why. But
Well, I mean, I don't know. You don't want to know why Obi-Wan grows a beard in Star Wars. You don't want to know, like, it's just a characteristic of him.
okay, if you want. I don't agree, but okay.
I think, Snake Plissken wearing an eye patch just makes him a real hero for handicapped and disabled people across the planet. He's just a real testament to what can be accomplished if you put your mind to it.
Sure. And other question, because the movie takes place in 1997. It came out in the 80s, in 81, you said. So you have less
Yes.
than 20 years difference. So I feel it was I don't understand why they didn't make another date. For example, my favorite movie is The Fifth Element, so it's in the future too, but it's in the 23rd century. So that as a viewer, you won't leave this period of time. but when you live in the 80s, you can expect that in 1997 you'll be on Earth, and you can check that what is in the movie is not the reality. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're saying, and I'm fairly certain, and I don't know this for a fact because I did not write it and I have not talked to Nick Castle or John Carpenter, the writers of the film. However, being a low budget film, I don't think they could afford to go too far into the future. So the budget was one of the limitations they had to work with within their script, within their story. Two, they wanted to address certain social and political issues of their time. So they wanted it to still feel kind of relevant, have that echo or have that shadow of situations. And three, being written in the 70s and filmed and produced in the early 80s, we were still smack in the middle of the Cold War. That didn't end until 1989 at the end of the decade. So maybe John Carpenter is a little bit more pessimistic than we thought, and he didn't think anybody would make it to 1997 to see that he was wrong.
Or maybe that adds to the fear. This is how fast things can turn, on the drop of a dime if we don't straighten ourselves out. This is what could
Hmm.
be in just a couple years away. That might add to the, like I said, the fear aspect of the script.
Yeah, and I mean, if you think about it and you look at it from a historical point of view, okay, let's just say the movie was made in 1981, and it takes place in 1997, so that's 16 years apart. So let's subtract 16 from 81, and we get 1965. If you look at 1965 versus 1981, you might as well be looking at a different planet. A lot of things changed in between that time. Specifically, and this is another theme and ingredient in the story, was the Vietnam War. And the Vietnam War was the first war that was broadcast into people's living rooms in color. World War II, we didn't have televisions. We had to go to the movie theater and watch a black and white newsreel. So having the Vietnam War broadcast into people's living rooms on a nightly basis just really kind of changed and skewed the culture and the psychological foundation of the culture. You had little kids watching Jack Ruby shoot Lee Harvey Oswald on live television in the 60s. So you got to take all of that historical context into consideration, and especially with science fiction, good science fiction, there is usually some type of allegory worked into the story and that's one of the things that made the Twilight Zone so excellent, was this sense of allegory and this, like, all right, we're going to talk about this, but we're really talking about this. And it's the melding of those ideas that give the entertainment value and make it kind of a safe space for audiences and viewers.
Indeed, I couldn't agree more.
The budgetary limitations on the production value is probably one of the things that skewed that timeline a little bit closer to our current timeline. Again, you can't project too far into the future with a minimalist budget because you just have no concept of where the technology is going and how to properly utilize it. So you might as well just stay closer to what you have to work with.
I was curious to know that when the movie came out in the 80s, did the audience react regarding the president image? Because there was a time, I don't know in America, but I know in France, at that time we respected a lot the president image. It's not really the case anymore, but I was curious to know how the audience reacted about that, because the president is kind of humiliated in this movie. So yeah, I wanted to know.
You're asking what the audience's perception of the president in this film was when it came out, because the president is very humiliated during the course of this film.
Exactly.
As it pertains to the character of the president, first of all, the president is British,
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is a podcast in and of
I was thinking
itself.
about that as I was watching. I was like, how'd they get away with that one? But okay.
Well, I had heard somewhere that Donald Pleasence did come up with a backstory for his character that enabled him to become the president. However, again, that just adds to the science fiction element, the fantasy element, the okay, this is just an entertaining little story element. And who's to say that he wasn't born in America and raised in a British prep school, you
Mhm.
know? Like it leads it open to conversation and speculation. But with regard to his treatment and his humiliation throughout the story, honestly, in the United States, we could not be more politically divided. There's the left and the right, and people in the middle kind of are kind of coerced to one side or the other, and it's the left versus the right all the time. And so you got to look at who was president in the 1980s when this film came out, and it was Ronald Reagan, who was a Republican. As a old school punk rock guy myself, I can tell you right now, ridiculing the president, specifically Ronald Reagan, was right up there for most people. People who love the president, well, then that's why he's the hero at the end. So it kind of walks that line. People who hate the current president, they're going to feed into the mistreatment of him. And people who love the president and see him as a strong character are going to feed into the end. But at the end of the day, we have Snake, the anti-hero, who is our protagonist. And I think his scene with the president at the end really says everything that needs to be said on the matter. When he asks the president, a lot of people died to help you. I just wanted to know how you feel about it. And the president not so much dismisses him, but kind of puts himself above the people and doesn't really express any kind of remorse or any kind of sorrow for their sacrifice. He's just focused on looking good for his press conference.
His attitude is that it's expected.
Yeah, it's expected. They're expendable. I'm the president. And you can see, of course, Snake's reaction, but then you can even see on Tom Atkins' face in that scene how he just kind of like lowers his head a little bit, like he's disappointed in his president and his answer, but that's who he works for. And of course, Snake, as I said, he gets the last laugh because that's the moment when the president kind of seals his fate insofar as his press conference goes. Snake could have given him the tape had he come off a different way, but I feel like it's a political commentary and it's a social commentary on power and the abuse of power and the corruption of power. So it's not necessarily specific to the president of the United States. Yes, he is playing the president of the United States, but again, he's British, so it's a little bit removed. And the circumstances of the story are so out there as far as reality goes, with the science fiction element and the prison element and the allegorical element. It really distills it down into a social and people and relationship element.
Okay. Thank you for your answers.
There you go.
I think, adding to that commentary thing, an interesting fact is that when the president is in a jam, they go to the common man to get him out.
Yeah, it's very interesting to think about. And again, the historical context that the story is built out of and based out of, especially as I mentioned, surrounding the Vietnam War and all of those disenchanted soldiers who were kind of misled by their government. This film is really just one big allegory for the Vietnam War era in American history. If you know that going in, it heightens the experience of the film. If you don't know that going in, it's very easy to just kind of like glide through this movie and not look beneath the surface.
And what about the Escape from LA? What the point of making another film with the same kind of scenes? Because you can expect when you see Escape from LA, if you know Escape from New York, you can expect it's like a continuity, that's something that happens in another story of Snake Plissken, but actually it's not another story. It's kind of the same story once again.
I think Escape from LA was created for entirely selfish reasons on the parts of the filmmakers. I think Kurt Russell just wanted to work with John Carpenter again. And I think Kurt Russell, one of his favorite characters, he's mentioned this a number of times, was Snake Plissken. So I think he just wanted to revisit the character. And so he got together with John Carpenter and Deborah Hill and said, hey, let's make another adventure for Snake. And I feel like John Carpenter is just not a sequel kind of a guy.
No.
It is essentially the same story, like almost beat for beat. There's like, these films are parallels of each other. You could watch one and effectively have seen the other. You don't necessarily get the experience of the actors and the specific characters. I mean, LA has some good some good moments and some good ideas. And personally, it has my favorite ending to a movie ever.
Well, I didn't make it to the end of that movie. I'd watched it years ago. Halfway through, I stopped, and I never stop in the middle of a movie. I just couldn't take anymore. It was just the same movie again with Steve Buscemi. I was like, I don't need it. But yeah, I think to your point, yeah, John Carpenter, I don't think is a sequel guy because he makes his statement and he's done, and there's no reason to go back. And I think a lot of movies would benefit from that. Jaws being one of them. You could just you made your statement, leave it alone. There's no reason to go back. And that's 9 times out of 10 why the director of the first one won't go back for seconds or thirds or whatever. They like it's enough. We know what this is. But I think that's a uniquely American problem, the sequel mentality. I think some franchises and ideas will lend themselves to sequels. Like James Bond, he can go on a million missions because he's a spy. Something like the Ghostbusters, if it's written well, they could fight millions of ghosts all over the city, all over the planet, whatever. So some things lend themselves to sequels and some things don't. And I think when you try to shoehorn it, everything suffers.
Yeah, I think it's just a shame because they could have done like another mission for Snake, like you said, like a James Bond, is instead of redoing what they did before. I think, yeah, it's a shame because, as you said, there were good ideas, but to redo the same thing with just a few more ideas, it doesn't work for me.
The framework of the character has so many different applications that, yeah, he could have gone into a mercenary situation. He could have gone into a reluctant hero situation in a totally different setting like John Rambo. There's a number of different ways and directions they could have taken Snake. And it's just unfortunate that they kind of just took him to LA. A lot of times people will talk about Escape from New York as a B movie, and I always kind of resent that term, but I feel like with LA, they sort of just embraced it. And the funny thing is, if you look at Escape from New York, made in 1981, the budget was $6 million, and the production value is fantastic. I mean, the production designer on this film was Joe Alves, who also worked on Jaws and directed Jaws 3. I think as a production designer, what he was able to achieve and accomplish really brought that film to a different level. If you were to look at another science fiction film from that same period, if you were to look at Blade Runner, okay, from 1982, produced at relatively the same time, and the budget for Blade Runner was $28 million. So essentially $30 million, basically 5 times the budget, 80% more money went into making Blade Runner than Escape from New York. And today, not that they are interchangeable, but they are contemporaries in their genre and of their time period within that genre. And so I just feel like it's that element of limitations inspiring creativity. Escape from New York only had so much, but what they had, they made work to a level where you don't even necessarily see that line that's blurred between Escape from New York and Blade Runner.
Yeah, that was one that upon first watching it, I didn't get what the big deal was, that everyone loved it. And then I realized that I watched the theatrical version. And and then I went back and I subsequently watched the final cut, which is the preferred version. Yeah, Blade Runner is awesome, but it's definitely in the same vein as a Escape from New York.
And have you seen Blade Runner?
I know, no, not the original one. I saw the one that came out. I think in 2019 or something like that with Ryan Gosling.
You mean with Jared Leto?
Of course. Sure.
Yeah, don't try to hide, Anne. We got your number. I just find this a little bit interesting too. Okay, so Escape from New York was made for $6 million and it grossed approximately $25 million. Blade Runner cost $28 million and only grossed $32 million. So that makes Escape from New York a much more successful film. In that same breath, Escape from LA had an estimated budget of $50 million. And it only grossed approximately $25 million. It kind of goes back to, it doesn't matter how much money you have necessarily. It depends on how creative you can get. And a big part of that is with the production value. With Escape from New York, they had a great idea and they needed a setting and they went to St. Louis where there had recently been a fire. So they took advantage of that situation, and it lended a very tangible authenticity to the film. With Blade Runner, there was a lot of razzle dazzle, there was a lot of special effects, and some people got lost in the story because of the original presentation of it. If you ever watched the theatrical version, it's like pleasuring yourself with a butcher's glove. It is just not a good time. That's a studio film as well. So now the studio is interfering with Ridley Scott and his vision, as where in an independent film, nobody's telling John Carpenter what to do. So there's pros and cons to both sides. Imagine that. You make a movie and you don't get to actually finish the movie for 30 years until you like prove yourself beyond the reaches of a career that, okay, yeah, this is the movie that should have been out. And okay, fine. Well, yeah, now we can make more money off of it. So go ahead, knock yourself out, Ridley Scott. Meanwhile, John Carpenter made the movie he wanted to the first time, and it was so good he decided to make it a second time. Unfortunately, nobody was interested at that point.
I think to your point before, Pete, the time. What was socially relevant at the time of New York was not the same as what was relevant in LA. So, even though you did kind of copy and paste the story, the surrounding factors are completely different. So it's just the whole complexity of it, the whole face of it's changed. It's different.
Just to LA's credit, it's I don't know if it has any credit. Never mind. No, that's not true. LA does have some fun cameos. Of course, Bruce Campbell plays the Surgeon General, and it's always good to see Bruce Campbell, especially going toe to toe with Kurt Russell. That's my ticket bought right there. Nevertheless, again, the plot just doesn't deliver. The story doesn't really deliver. I think one of the best parts of LA, though, to its defense, is the basketball scene. If you watch Escape from New York, you'll see the scene where he has to fight the gladiator in the audience, and that's kind of the spectacle of New York. In LA, the repurposed presentation of that scene is Snake Plissken has to go shoot hoops because John Carpenter is a gigantic basketball fan. And so he wanted Snake to be put in this situation against the shot clock. And to Kurt Russell's credit, he makes all of those shots.
With just one eye.
Precisely. Kurt Russell practiced, and he does every shot. He does a layup, he does a free throw, he does a three-pointer, he does a half court, he does a full court, and that's all Kurt Russell. So if nothing else, go on YouTube and just watch that scene.
But when the best part of a science fiction movie is a basketball play, you have to wonder if it's worth it,
LA is more fun for the people who made it than the people who had to watch it.
Perfectly said.
So on that note, I think that about does it for us here today. And I just want to thank everybody for checking out the VHS videos. Of course, there's going to be a new one every Thursday for the foreseeable future. So be sure to check those out. And if you can watch the film before the podcast, you can always participate in the conversation. Send us your questions, send us your comments, and we'll try to incorporate them into our conversations. But that's it for this week. Again, you can check out Steven Bendler over at Steve's Pop Culture Corner on Instagram, and he'll be posting some more pictures of his adventures at the Comic-Cons and Horror Cons. And Anne and I, of course, are on Letterboxd, and you can see what we've been watching over there and check out what we think. And until next week, I'm Peter O'Brien, along with Steven Bendler and Anne Milleville, saying au revoir.